In the event that there is one superhuman in all of fiction that could be said to remain close by Superman regarding sheer ubiquity and profundity of legend, it would be Spider-Man. Since 1962, Peter Parker, casualty of the radioactive arachnid chomp that changed the essence of American fiction, has been a darling character and good example to children, teenagers, and even grown-ups over the world. 10 amazing facts about Spider-Man. The web-throwing, divider-slithering kidder has embraced the possibility that force and obligation are inseparably connected, and that it is our obligation as individuals to help who we can, and for this he has been cherished, and exceptionally productive, for at any rate 3 ages now. Unfortunately, even the most healthy and kind characters aren't invulnerable to having a skeleton or 2 in their storerooms, and Spider-Man has a whole memorial park stuffed into his. From murder to injuring and back once more, here are the 10 most obscure crossroads in Spider-Man history. Number 10, he killed Finisher. At the point when a great many people consider Spider-Man, one of the primary things that strikes a chord is his arrangement on slaughtering. The divider crawler, similar to Batman, has a severe strategy on catching hoodlums as opposed to executing them. Tragically for the crooks, this hasn't generally been the situation. Enter a lowlife named Finisher, a previous professional killer contracted out to infamous supervisor miscreant Red Skull. Finisher is a professional killer who is so acceptable at his specific employment that he just requires a bit of material to follow his objective, similar to a hound dog with the rocket launcher. When following Spider-Man, the savage professional killer discovered him effectively, and continued to fire a rocket at the legend. Creepy crawly man leapt off the beaten path, and diverted the shot back at the lowlife, slaughtering him on the spot. Number 9, possessed by a villain. The superior Spider-Man storyline is viewed as truly outstanding, though most obscure. Spider-Man stories accessible. The comic line highlights Doc Ock, the detestable researcher with 8 robotic appendages, downloading his own cerebrum into Peter's body and assuming control over, fashioning his own way as the one and only superior Spider-Man. The malicious, and one may state crazy lab rat, downloaded his cerebrum into Peter's mind stem, and from that point smothered the genuine Peter, assuming control over his psyche like a cyberpunk future adaptation of a satanic belonging. This prompted Subside acting crazy, forceful, and without care or benevolence, prompting him being removed from the Avengers and freely disfavored. The extraordinary enjoyment of J. Jonah Jameson, the widely adored legend basic columnist. Despite the fact that Peter figured out how to wrestle control of his body again from Doc Ock at long last, the harm was at that point done, and his notoriety, and feeling of self, for all time spoiled by Doc Ock's impact. Number 8, the death of Gwen Stacy. A second frequently viewed as one of the most significant throughout the entire existence of the character, the passing of Gwen Stacy is additionally recognized as his most noteworthy misstep. In a celebrated scene from the comic, and shockingly appeared in the film The Amazing Spider-Man 2, a rundown miscreant Green Goblin hurled Gwen from a high edge and Spider-Man, thinking immediately, attempted to spare her with a line of webbing. The web slinger did what he excels at, and threw a rope of web, which connected to Gwen's back and halted her drop towards a bloody destruction. The demonstration was planned to spare her from turning into a blood smear on the solid. Sadly for Peter, and obviously Gwen, and the crowd, it rather had the contrary impact. The whiplash from the unexpected stop broke her neck, executing her immediately. Number 7. He hit Mary Jane. During the notorious clone saga, there was an issue where Ben Reilly, one more of the Spider clones, and Peter Parker had a little disagreement regarding who was the genuine Spider-Man and who was the clone. Some corrupted DNA proof and a couple of tests later, and it's uncovered that Peter Parker is the clone. This was, obviously, essentially a falsehood intended to help Ben Reilly, yet this news didn't settle well with Peter. Truth be told, the news so upset him that when Mary Jane, who was pregnant at that point, endeavored to comfort him, he hit her, tossing her over the room. Fortunately they moved beyond the episode and proceeded to raise a family together. Number 6. He killed Kraven the Hunter. In another conceivable future for the Divider Crawler, this one drove by a Peter whose choice was to execute his adversaries as opposed to hand them over to confront Tragically. Spider-Man was a killer not by some coincidence or by off-the-cuff activities, however by cool, determined decision. Everything began with Kraven the Hunter, a hysterical lowlife who, as his name recommends, chases our legend Spider-Man as though he were a creature, following him through the roads of New York like a jaguar following a harmed bunny. In the long run, his chase takes him excessively far, and prompts him murdering Kane, a Spider clone, and Martha Matty Franklin, a Spider-Woman. A huge mistake for Kraven, who would soon learn that a cornered spider can and will bite. In grief and rage, Peter turns the Hunter into the hunted, and slaughters Kraven in a brutal act of vengeance and fury. Peter was then expelled from the Avengers and hunted by the police for his crimes, as he began a slow descent into the life of a super-powered serial killer. Number 5. The Breaking of Harry Osborn. Moving ceaselessly from the funnies in their many imaginary worlds, one especially dim second comes to us from the motion pictures, explicitly the third of the Sam Raimi, Tobey Maguire set of 3. While affected by the outsider animal known as a symbiote that would later become Venom, Peter goes up against Harry Osborn and, true to form of anything including an irate chunk of outsider use, the showdown goes bad, with our saint, wannabe, reprobate. The lines become so obscure in this film, provoking and torturing a harmed and mentally harmed Harry. This battle between previous companions reaches a critical stage when Harry tosses a pumpkin bomb towards Peter, who gets it with his web and deliberately diverts the detonating Halloween decoration back at Harry, not as a brief moment response however as a determined strategy to hurt his previous companion however much as could be expected. The blast leaves Harry awfully deformed, and shows exactly how far separated the two have become, also the more obscure side of the web slinger. It's one thing to divert a rocket towards a foe, another completely to detonate a companion. Number 4. As a sentient zombie, he ate his Aunt May, in a substitute reality settled among the perpetual ocean of the Marvel multiverse. There exists a spot known as Earth 2149, a spot where all the Marvel legends, notwithstanding obviously the non-natural saints and those with all-out command over their bodies, have gotten contaminated with a horrendous infection. This infection left the saints with decaying tissue, a ceaseless yearning, and the entirety of their consciousness yet none of their restraint, which would in time end up being the most noticeably terrible piece of the contamination. In this universe, Spider-Man, previously decaying ceaselessly, had swung his path home to caution his auntie and sweetheart about the spreading contamination, just to then lose control and eat up them alive and shouting. His blame over the demonstration would frequent the zombie Peter completely through the comics run until his last appearance in the story, where he pulled off his own face to abstain from seeing his previous self. Number 3. Peter gave Mary Jane cancer. In what seems like a terrible April Fool's Day joke, an imaginary world Spider-Man once gave Mary Jane malignancy by means of sex. The story, which was set in a dim, abrasive conceivable eventual fate of Spider-Man, had a great deal letting it all out from the start. There were portrayals of mental trips of perished friends and family, a degenerate chairman, foul things astir in the city, all that your requirement for a lumpy Spider-Man comic. It appeared to be an arresting story for fans, ready to go down as one of the greats, a Spider-Man turned Batman circular segment. That is, until it was uncovered that the principal wellspring of contention is that Peter feels massive blame for executing Mary Jane with radioactive sperm. As indicated by the comic, the radioactive creepy crawly that bit him transformed him into a radioactive Spider-Man, therefore making love to Mary Jane was the equivalent of giving her a radioactive booster shot every single time. Number 2. He sold his marriage to the devil, in another second so scandalous that many have considered it the most exceedingly awful Spider-Man snapshot ever. The circular segment One More Day shows Spider-Man being given a decision between keeping his marriage with Mary Jane, the lady he had always wanted, whom he had been pursuing for quite a long time, or restoring his auntie of her disease. This decision was introduced to him by the strict devil of the Marvel Universe. At a certain point, Jesus Christ himself descended from heaven to advise Peter to release his aunt, with the goal that she could at last be very still. Peter instead made the deal, trading his life with Mary Jane for his aunt's health in a move that more or less pushed the reset button on several aspects of his personal background. While the choice to save Aunt May came as little surprise to readers of the comic, it was still recorded as one of his darkest moral moments. Number 1. He was molested. One generally secret reality about Peter Parker originates from that superb time in comic book history, the 80s, when PSAs were all over and nothing was sheltered from a character taking a gander at the camera and informing you to never at any point think concerning medications, sex, or rock and roll. One such PSA comes to us in Spider-Man and Power Pack, a comic that unquestionably had good intentions with its message against sexual maltreatment. What it did by and by, shockingly, was alarm numerous users in a scene where youthful and weak Peter is attacked by a family companion. While nothing unequivocal has appeared, it's clarified what befallen the lamentable youthful legend. The story has no uncertainty helped a few maltreatment casualties feel less alone, yet to huge numbers of us, this second was a dim, terrible scene that appeared unexpectedly and left an enduring feeling of disquiet afterward.